Well, I've been bashing my head against this Outer Wilds video for months now, and I'm making no headway, possibly owing to the blunt force trauma the efforts have caused, so to hell with it. Time to watch a few unhinged types bash their heads against each other instead. Why ruminate on the crushing emotional catharsis provided in witnessing countless universes die when I could be ruminating on gross physical violence? For example, have you ever wanted to see a huge old man beat up a twink? I can't say that was a question I'd given particularly much thought to, but I watched Record of Ragnarok anyway. It's not been a series I've been familiar with until very recently, so I went into this largely blind, with the only piece of information being that it's an over-the-top battle manga type situation, and those are usually quite fun, if nothing else. Well, that, and most people seem to agree the show is quite bad, if the MAL score is any indication, but you know what they say about going in with low expectations, you can only be pleasantly surprised. Evidently, the hypothetical hive mind of common idioms hasn't an earthly clue what it's talking about. Basic plot here, with heavy emphasis on the word basic, is that every god from every religious pantheon has collectively decided that humanity's really just not worth the trouble, and they've had quite enough, frankly, so they'll be wiping them all out now if it's all the same to you. Brunhilde, the oldest Valkyrie, suggests that since that's garbage, they should fight it out all proper-like in Ragnarok instead, to give humanity a fighting chance in a 1-7 style tournament, having seen how well it worked for Bugs Bunny & Co. in Space Jam, and that's essentially it for set dressing. Ordinarily, I'd ask for something a bit more compelling, but as the show is really just desperately trying to get away with as much rule of cool nonsense as it can before Mum comes in and whacks it upside the head with an old newspaper, in that it definitely succeeds. It's so blatant, in fact, that some might say that trying to provide a review of something that's so overtly beyond critique is a foolish endeavor, but I would remind those people that I am the guy who sat down and decided it would be a good idea to review Inferno Cop. Ragnarok does a particularly wonderful job of capturing what makes JoJo so charmingly campy, the way in which the melodrama is played completely straight, and nobody behaves like an actual person for starters. It feels more like pantomime almost, which is highlighted by how exaggerated the facial expressions on some of the characters are. Some of them look like the tragedy mask just swallowed a lemon-flavored nuclear warhead whole, and I don't mean the variety of candy. The faces are even more off the wall in the manga, if you can believe it, which I did read immediately after watching the show. It evidently left enough of an impression on me to warrant finding out what happened next, so that's high praise. That, and a friend of mine said it was, and I misquote, better, although I probably could have saved the time and just looked at the actual screen instead to have seen the Season 2 confirmed message after the credits, but my attention span is apparently easily derailed if the fact I've stopped to gaze rapturously at a passing mote of dust 15 times whilst writing this sentence alone is any indication. If you thought the gravitas with which Phantom Blood treated the funny zombie Nightman smearing the letter P on Jonathan's cool sword he found that said luck on the blade so it said pluck too, and the show treated it like it was literally the most amazing thing to happen in history was extremely good, then you may like Record of Ragnarok. Equally, if you enjoyed watching a tertiarily related character turn to camera and directly explain what was happening on the screen as though he was providing a running commentary, this may be another show in your wheelhouse. Really, if you've ever thought, I would like to watch Stardust Crusaders but without the pretense of a plot to get in the way of the big fights, then I don't know what to say. The exquisite narrative tapestry that Stardust weaves is as breathtaking as it is beautiful, like the part where Kakyoin sneakily makes an evil baby eat its own shit, then turns to camera with all the pride of a chess grandmaster putting my dementia-riddled grandfather in check. For example, Loki here is showing the state of the battle between character A and character B through a visual representation of two wine glasses modelled after the faces of the characters involved, and the liquid within the vessels shifts and threatens to overspill in accordance with who's winning the fight. Why did Loki have these two exact glasses ready, despite the fact that one of the characters involved was not the originally intended participant in this fight? Who exactly is Loki demonstrating this to other than Ares, who for plot convenience is a moron, and the audience? Why are the two wine glasses actually representing the ebb and flow of the fight as not just visual metaphor but actual diegetic instruments of measure? If you're asking these questions, you've already missed the point, but unlike some parts of JoJo where it feels like Araki's making it up as he goes along, which, don't get me wrong, is entirely part of the fun, there's a coherency to Ragnarok the Ragnarok, that's staying in, that's quite entertaining, likely owing to how streamlined it is. No filler, all killer, very literally, in fact. It's kind of like a fighting game story mode, or a presidential debate, in that you can tell it's all just a thinly veiled justification for why these two people are going to be punching one another for the next few minutes. So it's a uniquely single-minded series, and the first season is made up of just 3 major fights. The pull is in trying to figure out how who'll beat whom and with what method, and whilst there's rarely something as imaginative as stands, except there basically is, given that every fight is a one-on-one, there's also a sort of purity to it. This is good fundamentalist spectator blood sport. The real drive is looking at the hugely overpowered god and watching the deeply outmatched human attempt to overcome them with whatever tactics to which they're availed, and in some cases, especially Fight 4, which we won't see until Season 2 drops, it really does outright just read like a stand battle, and not the one with the ghost car or the gun either. The choice of fighters is entertaining as well, and my favourite match so far has been hey guys, me here. A significant amount of the enjoyment to be found in Ragnarok is in seeing who'll battle whom, and to say who would be a spoiler, featuring, as it does, a perfectly accurate recreation of these historical and or mythical beings, but it's definitely very historically accurate. Does anyone have any idea why Guan Yu's a robot? I have no idea why Guan Yu's a robot. I googled it, and apparently a student made a Transformers-esque robot of Guan Yu in China a few years ago, and there's a Gundam based on him, but why is Guan Yu a robot? My Dynasty Warriors education is failing me. That's not to say that Ragnarok is without flaw. It is, in fact, with flaw. Many flaw, in fact, since the series is just gladiatorial combat and none of the action in the show thus far takes place outside of the Colosseum in which the fights happen. The author thought better of having no reason to be invested in either character involved in a fight, and as a result a huge portion of the show's runtime is dedicated to flashbacks showing the histories of the people involved in the fights, and at their best, they can be entertaining, but more often than not they'll serve to kill momentum, like a clown running out onto the freeway during a rush hour. The first fight in particular wouldn't have been that exciting of a fight as it is, pitting a muscular, violent man against a muscular, violent man as it does, but both of these men can't seem to land a single punch without the narrator desperately scrabbling to flash back to their pasts and tell us whatever extremely cool piece of backstory explains why this punch in particular is going to be a really cool one. Just wait until you see it, you're going to be so impressed. There's a lot of tell don't show going on in Ragnarok really, but the biggest issue with this season of this adaptation in particular is that the flashbacks for the god's first participant are one of the most brutal first impressions anything has ever given me, right up there with when I was first introduced to a friend made at San Francisco State's apartment room, where whilst walking through said apartment I happened to glimpse a discarded fleshlight in the communal bathtub, positioned roughly next to a man unconscious on an inflatable mattress whom I couldn't tell was either unconscious or simply dead, prophetically splayed beneath a poster for Sword Art Online. This is all true. What can you say? It was San Francisco. When you realize the flashback looks like this, and this goes on for 10 minutes instead of giving us the fighting we signed on for, instead we get Attack on Titan by way of a papyrus slideshow. I suspect this is probably why a lot of people turned off the show so quickly, and I honestly can't say I blame them whatsoever. It's fair to say that the almost physical assault on my eyes this sequence is guilty of did not exactly make me excited to see more of it, in the same way that getting a tooth drilled to the gum line has a way of making you dislike the thought of dental appointments. Even a lot of the better flashbacks still don't quite work as well as they did in the manga. The animation as a whole does wobble quite a lot on the spectrum between good and bad, to the point where you wish it would just hurry up and pick a side, although as a rule it's largely serviceable. There are a couple of moments that fall flat compared to the source material, but altogether it's a perfectly accept. Are those soldiers CG? I take it all back, this show's garbage. So it'd be fairly easy to dismiss this as another Berserk-style failure to adapt a seinen, but I do genuinely think there's a lot to like about Ragnarok. The soundtrack especially, I thought, was used particularly well. There were a couple of moments that hit a lot harder than I thought they would, and the score is largely to thank for that. Not to say the characters are slouches either. The third human combatants' flashbacks were much better, even if they still felt like they got in the way of the actual fighting. I know, I'm never happy with anything. Too much fighting and I complain that there's not enough emotional stakes, too much flashback and I complain that there's not enough fighting. They just can't seem to win with me. As with all series like this, the hook is in seeing who the next fight will be between and how the relatively underpowered heroes will overcome the odds stacked against them. Usually the gods are very cocky and certain of their victory, especially in the early stage of the tournament as depicted in this arc. Between that and the fact that we are, unfortunately, human beings, the general feeling is one of wanting the humans to win, and it's definitely framed that way, but every fight seems to end on a note of, we're not so different, you and I, so it feels like they could just probably call this whole thing off and have a nice cup of tea instead. But you know how it goes, sunk cost fallacy and all that, I get it, I've played a gacha game in my time. Doubling down is my favourite pastime too. That's not to say it's not utterly predictable. As soon as the first Japanese man stepped into the ring with a cool katana, I thought, oh, I wonder who'll win this fight, and you know, not to spoil anything, but even gods can't escape Nippon steel folded over 1,000 times, I suppose. They do a very good job of keeping you on edge though, which is again why I refer to JoJo's as a point of comparison. Both have a habit of the fight going a lot worse before it gets better, which is always enjoyable. It's a shame that the fourth fight, a personal favourite of mine in the series, is omitted this season, but with a season 2 confirmed, with as much reliability as anything can be in this bizarre industry, that will hopefully make for a less brutal opener than Mr. Redhead's coffee-stained vacation slideshow. There's an infectious enthusiasm to Ragnarok's presentation, even if its formula is somewhat predictable. It's not reinventing the wheel, it's just painting some cool skulls and swords on it. Most of the animation is going from pose to pose with no in-between. Half the episodes are genuinely just two characters talking about the hits they're about to do, and sometimes an entire episode is spent solely on having a character just walk into the ring. And yet, despite all of that, I think I liked Record of Ragnarok quite a bit. It's no classic, I don't think I'd even say that it's particularly great, but I suppose one of the benefits of going in with low expectations is that you walk away pleasantly surprised.